All right, so on the surface, this looks like a pretty straightforward foreclosure case out of Idaho. You've got a homeowner, a couple of companies, seems simple enough. But trust me, what's hiding just beneath is a massive, complex legal battle. This is the story of one man's incredible fight against the entire system, and his only weapon? A 47-page document he wrote himself that is now making some serious waves. And boom, that's the opening line from the legal brief we're talking about. That's not just some dry legal jargon, right? That is a shot across the bow. It's basically a declaration that this isn't just about the facts, it's about how the rules of the game can be twisted. This one sentence tells you everything you need to know about the fight we're about to get into. Okay, so who is the man behind that powerful line? His name is Jeremy Bass. And when he found himself facing the loss of his home, he did what any of us would do. He tried to get a lawyer. But what happened next? Well, it shines a giant spotlight on a huge crack in the legal system. And I mean, he wasn't just casually looking around. He was in a desperate fight for his home against these two corporate entities, DPW Enterprises and Mountain Prime 2018. So he started making calls, sending emails, knocking on every single door he could find, just trying to get someone to listen. 125. Just let that number sink in for a minute. Can you imagine the frustration, making call after call only to hear no again and again? And the reason so many gave? Conflict of interest. You know, that's basically legal speak for, sorry, we already work with the big guys in the foreclosure industry. It's a classic example of what people call the access to justice gap. The system is so tangled up that a regular person can get completely frozen out. So yeah, every single door was slammed in his face. He was completely on his own, backed into a corner with literally nowhere else to turn. And this brings us to this really important term, perforce pro se. It's a fancy way of saying he didn't choose to represent himself because he thought it'd be fun. He was forced to. It was an absolute necessity, his only move left on the board, against a system that had totally locked him out. So, what do you do when you're out of options? Well, Jeremy Bass decided, fine, if I can't hire a lawyer, I'll just have to become one. He taught himself the incredibly complex world of appellate law and wrote the brief we're digging into today. And let me tell you, it is something else. I mean, just look at these stats for a second. We're talking 47 pages, citing more than 50 different legal cases, and raising 16 separate legal arguments. This isn't just some amateur paperwork. This thing is a legal masterpiece. Experts who've seen it say the quality rivals what you'd get from a high-powered, seasoned law firm. This guy didn't just learn the jargon, he learned the strategy. Okay, so we know the brief is impressive, but what's actually in it? What's the secret sauce? Well, Baz builds his entire case around a few absolute bombshells. We're going to break down the three biggest ones right now. All right, bombshell number one. Bass himself calls this his smoking gun. And believe it or not, it all comes down to a single sentence. A little slip of the tongue from the opposing lawyer that Bass argues should have ended the whole case right then and there. There it is. Now, to you and me, that might just sound like lawyer speak, right? A totally casual comment. But in the very technical world of law, specifically something called summary judgment, Bass heard that and thought, aha, gotcha. So here's why this is such a huge deal. For a judge to end a case early with a summary judgment, there can't be any major disagreements about the key facts. Bass's argument is, hey, their own lawyer just admitted on the record that there are disagreements. He calls it a judicial admission, which is kind of like a formal confession in court that you can't take back. Now, the other side would probably argue he was just speaking loosely. But the fact that Bass even spotted this and turned it into a core legal argument, that is just brilliant. Okay, let's get to bombshell number two. This is where the story completely explodes. It goes from being about one guy's house in Idaho to a potentially massive, multi-state fraudulent operation. So Bass starts digging into public records, and he finds this really suspicious pattern over in Utah. Case after case, the same two companies, DPW and Mountain Prime, keep winning foreclosure auctions. But here's the real kicker. The company that ran the auctions, the trustee, is supposed to be a neutral referee. But in these cases, their own law firm turns around and represents the winners in court. That is not just a red flag. That is a whole fireworks display of red flags, pointing to a massive conflict of interest. And get this, Bass actually ran the numbers. The statistical odds of the same bidder legitimately winning that many auctions in a row? About 1 in 244 million.
When you see a number like that, you stop thinking, what a coincidence, and you start thinking, this whole thing might be rigged.
And that brings us to the third and maybe the most personal bombshell of all. This one isn't about the companies or the lawyers. No, this one's about the judge herself. So it turns out the judge overseeing the foreclosure, Michelle Evans, had a pretty significant history with Bass. She was the judge in his very heated divorce, a divorce that was about this exact same house. And in that case, she had to make official judgments about Bass's personal credibility. Now, the rules for judges are really clear. If there's even a chance you might look biased, you're supposed to step away from the case. Bass argues this past history, which was never disclosed, is a pretty big ethical problem. Now, with these three bombshell arguments, Bass could have just tried to win his appeal. But he goes bigger, way bigger. He's not just fighting for his own house anymore. He's using his case to try and change the rules for everyone. He does this by essentially putting the Idaho Supreme Court on the spot, asking them to answer some really fundamental questions. Like, can a court use a procedural loophole to just ignore allegations of fraud? Or what rights do people representing themselves actually have? Do they get any leeway? And hey, if companies are making deals behind the scenes, is an auction really public at all? He's trying to force them to draw some clear lines in the sand that could protect every homeowner in the state. So when you take a step back, you have to ask, why does this one case, this one brief from Idaho, matter so much? It's because it's become more than just a legal filing. It's a blueprint. And it's not just us saying that. Legal scholars like Professor Margaret Thornton are pointing to this brief and saying, look, this is how you do it. It's a roadmap that shows other people how to fight back against the entire system, not just a single bad outcome. This document could literally be used as a model for these kinds of fights all across the country. And that really brings us full circle. This whole story puts a giant spotlight on that access to justice problem we talked about. When over 125 law firms have to say no because of their ties to corporate clients, it really makes you feel like the scales of justice are tilted to protect the powerful, leaving regular citizens with no voice at all. Which leaves us with one last big question. This entire incredible story hinges on one man's refusal to be silenced. It makes you wonder, when the system is designed to shut you out, maybe the most powerful thing you can do is learn its language and use its own rules to fight back.